The story of Daniel in the lion's den will show you the power of trusting in God, even in the face of certain death. Daniel 6:22. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight. In the grand city of Babylon, now under the rule of King Darius, there lived a man named Daniel. Known for his wisdom and integrity, Daniel quickly stood out among the administrators of the vast Persian Empire. His dedication and skill were unmatched, and soon King Darius planned to place him over the entire kingdom. However, not everyone was pleased with Daniel's rise. Other officials, consumed by envy, began to look for faults in his character or his work. Day after day, these men watched Daniel, hoping to find something to accuse him of. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find any error or corruption in his actions. Daniel was a man of integrity, faithful to his God and to his king. Frustrated, the officials realized that the only way to bring Daniel down would be to use his faith against him. They knew that Daniel was devoted to his God and that nothing would make him abandon his faith. So the envious officials devised a cunning plan. They went to King Darius with a proposal that seemed to flatter the monarch's ego. "O King Darius, live forever," they exclaimed, bowing before the throne. "All the officials of the kingdom have agreed that the king should issue a decree." The king, intrigued, asked them to continue. The men explained their plan. For 30 days, no one in the entire kingdom should pray or make petitions to any god or man, except to King Darius. The idea pleased the king, who did not see the trap hidden in the proposal. Without hesitation, Darius signed the decree, making it the law of the Medes and Persians, a law that not even the king could change once enacted. The officials could barely contain their satisfaction as they left the royal presence. They knew that Daniel, as faithful as he was, would not obey this order. It was only a matter of time before they could catch him. Meanwhile, in his house, Daniel heard about the new decree. His heart was heavy with the news, but his determination did not waver. He knew what he needed to do. As was his custom, Daniel went up to his upstairs room, where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. There, he knelt down and began to pray, giving thanks to God as he always did, 3 times a day. Daniel did not try to hide his devotion. His faith was more precious to him than his own life. The officials, eager to catch Daniel in the act, rushed to his house. When they arrived, they found exactly what they had expected: Daniel on his knees praying fervently to his God. With triumphant smiles, they hurried back to the palace to report their discovery to the king. "O king," they said, barely containing their excitement, "Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you have issued. He continues to pray 3 times a day." Upon hearing this, King Darius was deeply distressed. He held Daniel in high regard and realized too late the trap that had been set. The king spent the rest of the day trying to find a way to save Daniel, but the officials relentlessly reminded him, "Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." With a heavy heart, Darius realized he had no choice. At sunset, King Darius gave the order he so feared. Daniel was brought and thrown into the lion's den. The king himself spoke to Daniel. "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A large stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own royal seal and the seals of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation could not be altered. That night, the palace was silent. King Darius, tormented by guilt and worry, could not sleep. He refused food and entertainment, thinking only of his faithful servant Daniel, alone in the darkness surrounded by hungry beasts. The hours dragged on as the king anxiously awaited the dawn, hoping against hope that Daniel's God had performed a miracle. As soon as the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, King Darius hurried to the lion's den. With his heart pounding, he approached the sealed entrance. "Daniel, servant of the living God," he called out with a trembling voice, "has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, to the king's immense relief and joy, a familiar voice responded from within the den. "O king, live forever," came Daniel's voice, clear and firm from within the den. King Darius's heart leapt with joy at hearing these words. Daniel continued, "My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." Daniel's unwavering faith had triumphed over mortal danger, and his innocence had been proven in the most extraordinary way. Overflowing with joy, King Darius immediately ordered that Daniel be brought out of the den. When Daniel emerged, everyone present was astonished. There wasn't a single scratch on his body, no sign of injury. His clothes were intact, and his hair was only slightly tousled from sleep. The miracle was undeniable. Daniel's God had completely protected him from the hungry beasts throughout the night. News of the miracle spread quickly throughout the palace and beyond. Crowds gathered to see with their own eyes the man who had survived a night among fierce lions. Many who had previously doubted Daniel's God now were filled with awe and reverence. King Darius himself was deeply moved by the power of Daniel's God. As the murmur of the crowd grew, King Darius turned to the officials who had plotted against Daniel. His face, once joyful, now was stern and resolute. With a gesture, he ordered that those men be brought before him. The officials who had so recently reveled in their supposed victory now trembled with fear under the king's severe gaze. "You have plotted against a righteous man," declared the king, his voice echoing through the throne room. "You used deceit to manipulate the law and tried to destroy Daniel. Now you will see what happens to those who oppose the living God." With these words, the king ordered that the conspirators, along with their families, be thrown into the same lion's den. The sentence was carried out immediately. The condemned men's screams of terror were quickly silenced as they reached the bottom of the den. The lions, hungry after a night without touching Daniel, showed no mercy. Before the men even hit the ground, the beasts tore them apart. The contrast with Daniel's miraculous protection could not have been clearer. This act of divine justice left a profound impression on all who witnessed it. The power of Daniel's God was demonstrated not only in his ability to protect the faithful, but also in his justice against those who opposed him. The fear of the Lord fell upon the people, and many began to question their own beliefs in light of this extraordinary event. Deeply moved by all he had witnessed, King Darius decided it was time to take action. He summoned his scribes and dictated a new decree, this time not to prohibit worship but to promote it. The decree would be sent to every corner of the vast empire, proclaiming the greatness of Daniel's God. "I decree," the king dictated with a firm voice, "that in every part of my kingdom, people must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." The words of the decree echoed throughout the palace as the scribes worked furiously to record them. King Darius, once a worshipper of many gods, was now proclaiming the supremacy of Daniel's God. It was a radical shift, not just for the king but potentially for the entire empire. Meanwhile, Daniel watched everything with a mixture of gratitude and humility. His ordeal in the lion's den had not only preserved his life but also opened the door for the knowledge of the true God to spread across the land. Daniel knew that this was just another chapter in the long history of God's work among the nations. In the days that followed, Daniel was elevated to an even higher position in the kingdom. King Darius, impressed not only by Daniel's wisdom, but now also by the power of his God, entrusted him with even greater responsibilities. Daniel became a close advisor to the king, influencing decisions that would affect millions of lives across the empire. The story of Daniel in the lion's den spread quickly, far beyond the confines of the palace and the city of Babylon. Caravans carried the news to distant lands, and in every place where it was told, it left people in awe. The faith of one man and the power of his God had defied death and changed the heart of a king. Throughout the empire, people began to look to the heavens with a new sense of wonder and fear. The God who could shut the mouths of lions and protect his faithful servants was worthy of reverence. Many began to seek more knowledge about this powerful God, turning to Daniel and other Jewish exiles for answers. For Daniel, the experience in the lion's den was more than a personal trial. It was a living testimony to God's power and faithfulness. He continued to serve with humility and integrity, always giving glory to God for his achievements. His story became a beacon of hope for the Jewish exiles and an inspiration for future generations. Thus, what began as a plot to destroy a righteous man turned into a powerful testimony of God's sovereignty. The lion's den, intended to be Daniel's grave, became the stage for one of the greatest miracles recorded in Scripture. And through this event, the name of the God of Israel was exalted in one of the greatest empires of the ancient world. As the years passed, the story of Daniel and his miraculous night in the lion's den continued to resonate throughout the Persian Empire. The impact of that event did not diminish over time. On the contrary, it seemed to grow as more and more people reflected on its meaning. Daniel, now an older man but still full of wisdom and faith, often found himself surrounded by people eager to hear his story firsthand. On a quiet afternoon, as Daniel walked through the palace gardens, a young servant approached him timidly. "Master Daniel," said the boy, his voice trembling with emotion, "is it true that the lions did not harm you? That an angel came and shut their mouths?" Daniel smiled gently, remembering that fateful night as if it were yesterday. With patience, he began to recount his story once more, his eyes shining with the memory of God's faithfulness. Daniel described how, that dark night, when he was thrown into the den, he felt a peace that surpassed all understanding. "I knew," he said, "that my life was in the hands of God. If he chose to rescue me, I would praise him, and if he chose to take me home, I would still praise him." The young servant listened with wide eyes, amazed by Daniel's courage and unwavering faith. As he spoke, Daniel reflected on how that experience had changed not only his life, but that of so many others. He told the young servant how, in the days following the miracle, he saw a remarkable change in the palace and beyond. People who had once mocked faith in one God were now seeking to understand more about the God of Israel. King Darius himself had become a fervent advocate for Daniel's God. "But do not think," Daniel warned the young man, "that it was my own strength or goodness that saved me. It was only by the grace and power of God that I survived that night." He explained how, even in the darkness of the den, he felt the divine presence around him, like a protective shield against danger. "The lions were there. I could hear their breathing, feel their eyes upon me, but it was as if an invisible force kept them at bay." Daniel continued his narrative, describing how he spent the night in prayer and praise. "I did not know if I would see dawn," he said, "but I was at peace, knowing that I was in the presence of God." He spoke about the long night, the moments of silence interrupted only by the occasional distant roars of the lions, and the sense of calm that enveloped him despite the terrifying circumstances. The young servant, deeply moved by the story, asked a question that many had asked before. "Master Daniel, were you not afraid?" Daniel paused for a moment, carefully considering his response. "Of course I felt fear," he admitted. "I am human after all. But my trust in God was greater than my fear. I remembered all the times he had been faithful in the past, and that gave me courage." Daniel then shared with the young man a valuable lesson he had learned through that trial. "See," he said, "God does not promise us a life without challenges or dangers. What he promises is to be with us in the midst of those difficulties." He explained how that experience had strengthened his faith in ways he could never have imagined, teaching him to trust in God even in the darkest circumstances. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Daniel and the young servant continued their conversation. Daniel spoke about how, after his rescue, he saw the hand of God moving in powerful ways throughout the kingdom. King Darius's decree, he explained, opened doors for many to know the true God. I saw people from all nations and languages begin to seek the Lord. Daniel shared how, in the years that followed, he had the opportunity to counsel not only King Darius, but also other leaders who came after him. Each conversation, he said, was a chance to showcase God's wisdom and love, not by my own ability but because God chose to use me as his instrument. The young servant, deeply moved by the story and Daniel's humility, asked one final question. Master, how can I have faith like yours? Daniel smiled gently, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Faith, he said, is not something we achieve by our own strength. It is a gift from God that grows as we trust in him day by day, in both small and great things. Daniel encouraged the young man to seek God daily, to study the scriptures, and to live a life of integrity, even when no one was watching. Remember, he said, the true test of our faith is not in the big moments of crisis, but in how we live each day, trusting God in all things. As they walked back to the palace, the sky now dotted with stars, Daniel silently reflected on the goodness of God. His life, from his youth in Jerusalem to that moment as a respected advisor in the Persian court, was a testimony to God's faithfulness. The lion's den had been just one chapter, albeit a powerful one, in a long story of trust and obedience. Daniel knew that his story would continue to be told long after he was gone, not because he was special, but because the God he served was extraordinary. His hope was that, through his experience, many would come to know and trust the living God, the God who shuts the mouths of lions and delivers his servants. That night, as he prepared for sleep, Daniel offered a prayer of gratitude. Gratitude not only for being saved from the lions, but for every day of his life, every opportunity to serve, and every chance to share God's love with others. He fell asleep in peace, confident that no matter what tomorrow brought, the God who had protected him in the lion's den would continue to guide his steps. Years had passed since the miraculous night in the lion's den, and the Persian Empire had seen many changes. Kings came and went, but Daniel's influence remained constant, a beacon of wisdom and faith in a constantly changing world. Now, with white hair and slower steps, Daniel continued to be a respected and beloved figure by many. One morning, as Daniel sat in his usual place in the royal council, a messenger hurried into the room. News had arrived of a revolt in a distant province of the empire. The young king, Darius's successor, looked anxiously to Daniel, seeking his guidance as he had so many times before. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, seeking divine wisdom before speaking. "My king," Daniel began in a calm voice, "remember that the true strength of a ruler lies not in his ability to punish, but in his willingness to show mercy." He advised the king to investigate the reasons behind the revolt, to listen to the people's grievances, and to seek a peaceful solution. Daniel's counsel, as always, was tempered with compassion and justice. As the council discussed the situation, Daniel reflected on how his experience in the lion's den continued to shape his approach to life and leadership. He shared with the young king how that night had taught him about the importance of faith in times of crisis. "Sometimes," he said, "we face situations that seem impossible, like a den full of hungry lions. But it is in those moments that we must trust in God most fully." The king, impressed by Daniel's wisdom, asked him to share more about that fateful night. Though the story was well known throughout the kingdom, hearing it directly from Daniel always brought a new perspective. With humility, Daniel began to recount the events that led to his sentence, the night in the den, and the miracle of his deliverance. As he spoke, Daniel emphasized that the true miracle was not just his physical survival, but the transformation that occurred in people's hearts. "See," he told the attentive council, "how God used a situation meant for evil to bring knowledge of himself to an entire nation. This teaches us that even in our greatest difficulties, God may be working for a greater purpose. Daniel explained how, in the years following that night, he saw a gradual but significant change in people's attitudes toward faith. Many who had once worshipped idols began seeking the living God. King Darius's decree, proclaiming the greatness of Daniel's God, had opened doors for conversations about faith that were previously impossible. However, Daniel warned, true faith cannot be imposed by royal decree. It must be born in each person's heart. He encouraged the young king and the council to rule with justice and compassion, allowing the people to see the character of the true God reflected in their actions. For it is through our lives, more than our words, that we bear witness to our God, he concluded. As the day progressed and the council continued to debate the best way to handle the revolt, Daniel remained a calm and wise presence. He listened carefully to each argument, offering advice when asked, always seeking a solution that honored God and served the good of the people. During a break in the deliberations, one of the younger counselors approached Daniel. "How do you maintain such calm?" he asked, "even in the face of such crises?" Daniel smiled gently, recalling his own youth and the many lessons he had learned over the years. "It is the peace that comes from knowing that God is in control," he replied. "Just as he shut the mouths of the lions, he can calm the hearts of men." Daniel shared with the young counselor how his experience in the lion's den had strengthened his trust in God. "I learned," he said, "that there is no situation so desperate that it is beyond God's reach. Whether facing hungry lions or dealing with a revolt in the kingdom, we can trust that God is with us and that His will shall prevail." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the council chamber, the king finally reached a decision. Influenced by Daniel's wisdom, he chose to send a delegation to hear the concerns of the rebels, seeking a peaceful resolution before considering military action. Daniel nodded in approval, grateful to see the seeds of compassion and justice he had sown over the years bearing fruit. That night, as he returned to his quarters, Daniel reflected on the day and on his long life of service. He thought of all the challenges he had faced, from his youth as an exile to that moment as a respected counselor. Every trial, every victory, had been an opportunity to bear witness to God's faithfulness. Daniel knelt in prayer, as he had done 3 times a day since his youth. He thanked God for His constant presence and guidance, for the wisdom given, and for the many opportunities to serve. He prayed for the young king and for the kingdom, asking that peace would prevail and that many would come to know the true God. As he prepared for sleep, Daniel looked out the window at the bright stars in the night sky. He smiled, remembering how, even in the darkness of the lion's den, God's presence had shone brighter than any star. That memory continued to be a source of strength and comfort, not just for Daniel, but for all who heard his story. Daniel fell asleep in peace, confident that just as God had guided his steps for so many years, He would continue to guide future generations. The story of his night in the lion's den would remain a living testimony of God's power, protection, and faithfulness, inspiring faith and courage in countless hearts for generations to come. The sun rose over Babylon, its golden rays bathing the city in a gentle light. Daniel, now in the final years of his life, awoke as he always did, with a prayer of gratitude on his lips. Despite his advanced age, his eyes still shone with the same unwavering faith that had sustained him for so many decades. That morning, Daniel received an unexpected visit. A group of young scribes, responsible for recording the history of the empire, came to him with a special request. They wanted to hear, one last time directly from Daniel, the full story of his experience in the lion's den. Their goal was to preserve this account for future generations, ensuring that the memory of this extraordinary miracle would never be lost. Daniel welcomed them with a warm smile, inviting them to sit down. Although he had recounted this story countless times over the years, he knew that each retelling was an opportunity to glorify God. With a clear and steady voice, Daniel began his narrative, transporting his young listeners back to that fateful day so many years ago. He described King Darius's decree, the trap set by his enemies, and his decision to continue praying openly even knowing the consequences. "You see," Daniel said, "true faith does not hide when challenged. It stands firm, trusting that God is greater than any human threat." Daniel then spoke about the moment he was taken to the lion's den. He described the weight of the stone being rolled over the entrance, the oppressive silence that followed, and then the soft yet unmistakable sound of paws moving in the darkness. "In that moment," he said, "I knew I was completely in God's hands. Whether he chose to deliver me or take me home, I was ready to accept his will." The young scribes listened intently, their quills moving quickly to capture every word. Daniel continued, describing how in the midst of the darkness and danger he felt a heavenly presence. "It was as if an invisible shield surrounded me," he explained. "I could feel the lions around me, but it was as if a divine force was keeping them at bay." Daniel spoke about the long hours of the night, how he spent the time in prayer and praise, his voice echoing in the den. He described the supernatural peace that enveloped him, a peace that defied all human logic. "Understand," he told the scribes, "this peace does not come from our own strength, but from absolute trust in the power and goodness of God." When he reached the part about the dawn, Daniel's voice filled with emotion. He narrated the moment he heard the anxious voice of King Darius calling from the entrance of the den, the joy in his response, and the amazement of everyone when he was brought out unharmed. "That moment," Daniel said, "was not just my deliverance but a powerful testimony of the living God to the entire empire." Daniel then shared with the scribes the aftermath of that miraculous event. King Darius's decree proclaiming the greatness of the God of Israel, the punishment of the conspirators, and the gradual but profound change that followed in people's attitudes toward faith. "See," he said, "how God used one night of danger to open the hearts of an entire nation." As he concluded his narrative, Daniel emphasized that the true miracle was not just his physical survival, but the spiritual transformation that followed. "My young friends," he said tenderly, "always remember that God can use our greatest trials for his greatest purposes. Do not fear the lions you may face in your own lives." The scribes, deeply moved, asked one final question. "Master Daniel, after all these years, what does this experience mean to you now?" Daniel was silent for a moment, his eyes filling with tears of gratitude. "To me," he answered softly, "it is a constant reminder of God's faithfulness. It is the anchor of my faith, the reason for my hope, and the foundation of my testimony." As the young men prepared to leave, Daniel blessed them, praying that the story they had recorded would touch hearts and inspire faith for generations to come. He encouraged them to live their own lives with the same trust in God, facing their own challenges with courage and integrity. After the scribes departed, Daniel found himself alone, reflecting on God's goodness throughout his life. He thought of all the lions he had faced, not just the literal beasts on that famous night, but the many challenges, temptations, and trials over the years. In every situation, God had proven his faithfulness. That night, as he always did, Daniel knelt in prayer by the open window facing Jerusalem. But this time, his words were different. It was a prayer of farewell, of final gratitude. He sensed that his earthly journey was nearing its end, and his heart longed for his heavenly home. "My God," Daniel prayed, "you who shut the mouths of lions and opened the hearts of kings, accept my gratitude for a life lived in your presence. May the story of your faithfulness continue to be told, and may many come to know you as the living and true God." When Daniel finally lay down to sleep, a serene smile illuminated his face. He knew that whether he awoke to another day of service in this world or to the presence of his Lord, he was safe in the hands of the God who had kept him throughout his life. And so, the story of Daniel, the young exile who became a powerful testimony of faith, came to its earthly end. But his legacy, the story of his night in the lion's den and a lifetime of faithfulness, would continue to inspire hearts and strengthen the faith of countless generations to come. For Daniel's message was clear. No matter how dark the night or how fierce the lions, the living God is always present, always faithful, always able to do the impossible for those who trust in him. If you enjoyed this content, I humbly ask that you subscribe and leave a like to stay updated on future videos. Please write in the comments which Bible story you would like us to feature on the channel. Thank you for being here. May God bless you abundantly.